you for joining us today. My name is Robin. I am the program manager for Prairie Band Potawatomi Vocational Rehabilitation Program.
And I'm Jamie Wabansi, and I'm a counselor with the Vocational Rehabilitation Program.
March is National Disability Awareness Month. It's a time to recognize people living with disabilities by sharing their success stories, creating a positive and inclusive space in our community, and curbing discrimination and stigma through education. But today we're going to talk to you and give you general information about the disabilities and share about our own tribal vocational rehabilitation program, also known as VR. So let's begin with defining a disability. Jamie, can you give us an overview?
According to the 2022 census, 1 in 4 adults in the United States live with a disability, and with our pandemic, numbers are increasing. The 1990 Americans with Disability Act defines a person with a disability as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more major life activities. It has a history of record of the impairment, is perceived by others as having an impairment, and the Act protects a person who falls into any mentioned categories. And I want to say the Act is much more than defining a disability.
Yeah, thanks for stating that. It sounds clear-cut, but I know it's not. There's more to it than meets the eye.
While we're talking about different disabilities, there are 6 types of disabilities. We have a physical or a motor disability, and that can affect somebody who is either paraplegic, maybe in a wheelchair, traumatic brain injury. We also have sensory, which can be visual or hearing, that affects an individual's impairment. You also have an intellectual, which could be memory. A lot of times you have the intellectual students who are in school and they receive an IEP through their schooling. Some of that affects how a child may interact with their schoolwork and their behaviors. We also have psychosocial, which that looks upon the depression, mood disorders, and visceral, which is internal organs. And those are a lot that people may not know about, but that would be somebody with diabetes. That may be a person who has asthma, and that affects how they can interact at work or do certain type of activities. And so there's obstacles that are in place. And one of the last ones would be substance abuse use disorder, which is also an impairment to an individual being able to function outside of their normal activities outside of the home.
I appreciate you sharing that. It really shows that the disability community is very diverse and that disabilities can be unseen and even possibly go undiagnosed. So people living with a disability come from all walks of life, want to acknowledge that, and a person can be born with a disability or may acquire a disability due to an accident, illness, or from aging. Since we've defined a disability, can you offer some examples?
So some of the examples that I could offer is for psychosocial, person with depression. That may affect how they get out of bed in the mornings. Maybe they struggle to shower, and it's small things that maybe a person who does not have this disability overlooks. Person with traumatic brain injury, sometimes that affects how they can interact and how they work at home. But when they come to the workplace, that can become a struggle because they have certain things that they may not be able to remember. They have certain things that may become an impairment for them to complete a job task.
There's so much to learn and be mindful of when you encounter a person living with a disability, but you don't need to be an expert, right?
Correct.
So they are people first.
Yes, people first. There are national campaigns titled, "We Are the People, Call Me By My Name," an initiative to eliminate several words which used to be associated with people living with disabilities. They, too, want to feel respected and important. It is important to recognize their value and contribution, and I am glad we get to bring awareness about disabilities to our tribal community, Robin.
Speaking of tribal community and awareness, there is a resource I would like to talk about, which is Tribal Vocational Rehabilitation Program, also known as TVR or simply VR. Our purpose is to assist American Indians with disabilities to find or maintain employment. Essentially, a mental or physical condition is negatively impacting an individual's current employment or their ability to move up in a job, or it's preventing them from obtaining employment altogether. This is where VR comes in. We assist with effectively dealing with their disability issue. That may mean just getting them familiar with the disability. We prep them for successful employment and help them in their well-being through culturally appropriate services. It's important to note that each person's circumstance is different, but we meet our participants where they are.
Can you explain more on the culturally appropriate services?
I'm glad you brought that up. Those three words separate tribal VR from state VR. So history has shown that tribal nations did not participate and or benefit from state VR programs, which is why tribal VR was created. What makes tribal VR unique is we provide culturally appropriate services. This is a broad term because it differs among tribal communities. A tribe's traditions, environment, and so forth on the West Coast looks very different from here. It also can include knowledge of a tribe's lived experience, whether that's the history and or federal legislation which a tribe has endured. This can also include understanding the type of barriers, such as transportation, and can encompass culturally sensitivity regarding communication and even a family's practice within the service area.
Okay, very true.
Yeah, tribal VR is comprehensive. We are also an eligibility-based program, meaning an individual must have a diagnosed disability. And if you're not sure, I still highly encourage you to apply with us, and we can help navigate you through that process. I want to say, though, that we are not a quick fix program, meaning it could take months or perhaps a year or two for an individual to get a job. Again, we're meeting them where they are, and we're finding out what works for them.
Nice. So with an individual that comes and they are trying to go back to school as one of their goals to go into the work environment, and that takes about maybe a year to get through everything, that's okay?
Yeah, that's one good example. An example for an individual who's just searching for a job. We are not aiming for any job. Instead, we're focused on longevity. We're thinking about career. Part of the VR staff's responsibility and training is to make sure that we are assessing the participants' unique strengths, resources, their priorities, what are their concerns, their abilities, their work history, and so much more. A lot of planning takes place. We as VR staff have responsibilities, and so does the participant. Also, the assessment and planning again looks very different for each person because their circumstance is different. And this is what we call individualized services. Someone's services will not look the same as another person. So the example you brought up of an individual wanting to attend school, those services will look different to an individual who is only seeking a job, or for an individual who receives Social Security and is looking for a part-time job. Those are just some of the examples I wanted to point out.
That's nice. So, like you discussed, everyone's journey is different. So speaking about different journeys, when I was growing up, disabilities weren't really discussed. It was hard for our family members to identify that something was wrong with one of our children. So a lot of times disabilities went unseen, and it looked more as a behavior. When people have behaviors in the schools, it may be because an underlying disability that maybe occurred, like autism.
Yeah.
You know,
Similar. I had the similar experience. We did not speak about them. I mean, in school you might have noticed an individual was being taken out of class, or maybe they were held back, but nothing too elaborate as to the reason behind that, which you'll also find in adults now. Sometimes there is just discrimination and stigma around disabilities. As I mentioned, our program, you must have a diagnosed disability, and sometimes individuals do not want to receive the diagnosis for some of the reasons you mentioned. Maybe there was no family support, there was just no information, and at the time, depending on the family, the environment, and the school setting, there could be a number of reasons. So I'm glad you brought that up. But Yes, everyone's journey is different. The best way to contact us is by calling 785-966-8331. We are located in the Prairie Band Potawatomi Health Center in the Social Services Department.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.